Well, good evening. My name is Kathleen Pearl, and I'm the Chief Impact Officer here at the Military Women's Memorial. And on behalf of the memorial team, including our board chair, Major General Retired Jan Edmonds, U.S. Army, who's here tonight, and also Foundation President, Chief Warrant Officer 5 Retired Phyllis Wilson, and special guest, Ambassador Lisa Gable. It's an honor to welcome all of you here for the Memorial's Women, Peace, and Security event. I also want to begin by thanking our partners, AllTru, Dulcinea Productions, the Atlantic Council of Counterterrorism Project, Our Rescue, and SOFT. We're not only incredibly grateful for your partnership tonight, but for sharing the Memorial's passion and commitment to supporting military women and all warfighters. The Memorial launched its WPS series in the fall of 2022. And for some, WPS may still seem new, but it's really just relatively new terminology coined 25 years ago by UN Security Resolution 1325 for something that we've long known to be true. The proof is in our history. Women have always answered the call, from the Revolutionary War until today, serving during times of war and peace. Their service has been instrumental through the centuries, despite of, and eventually challenging and overcoming legal and cultural barriers. Yet even so, women's contributions largely went unrecognized, unexamined, and untold. And this is an important point to make. Not recognizing and analyzing women's contributions creates a blind spot in our defense. Left unchecked, this blind spot can degrade our operational effectiveness and can lead to future strategic missteps. On the other hand, studying women's contributions, their experiences, and lessons learned leads to a fuller understanding of our warfighting capabilities. And that's why the Memorial's mission is so important. We preserve and share the stories of women who have served past and present in and with the U.S. military. And we do this through exhibitions, public programming. We have a research library, a collection of over 8,000 donations and 1,400 oral histories, and a digital database of over 330,000 individual stories of women's service. In this way, the Memorial is very uniquely positioned as a resource and as a forum in support of U.S. Women, Peace, and Security Act of 2017. The Memorial's approach is to place the perspectives of military women at the center of discussions with practitioners, scholars, leaders across public and private sectors and partner nations, all to better understand the essential, long-standing, and ever-growing role of women in our nation's defense. And tonight's discussions are certainly timely. We will begin with a panel discussion highlighting the newly released docuseries, Guerrera, which tells the story of the cultural support teams and Female Tactical Platoon, the women who operated on the front lines in Afghanistan during America's longest war. We will then pivot to a conversation, a fireside chat, to explore how women's roles continue to shape special operations, counterterrorism efforts, and the importance of interagency collaboration. Okay, now during each of our WPS events, we like to recognize and honor trailblazers, those who came before and paved the way. Our WPS series trailblazers to date have all been women. So tonight I thought we'd mix it up a little, and given the topics that we are exploring, it seems fitting to journey back to 1942 through 1945, the lifespan of the Office of Strategic Services. I'm sure many in this room are familiar. Formed and led by the legendary Medal of Honor recipient, Bill Donovan, Wild Bill, the OSS was created to give the U.S. and allies a wartime advantage. As the forerunner of today's Special Operations Forces and centralized intelligence, hallmarks of the OSS included asymmetrical and covert ops, espionage, and tactical innovation during World War II. All the sexy stuff. Many may be surprised to learn that 35% of the OSS were women. And that's not an insignificant percentage. And I've always wondered how that came to be. In her book, Sisterhood of Spies, Elizabeth, she went by Betty McIntosh, who served in the OSS, worked closely with Donovan, and went on to a full career in the CIA, noted that Donovan wasn't a feminist in the modern sense, but he did recognize the crucial role women could play in intelligence and warfare. Under Donovan's leadership, the OSS actively recruited women, placing them in key roles across OSS departments. These women were pioneers, breaking barriers in intelligence, resistance activities, special operations, and research and analysis. Donovan didn't leave talent on the table. He sought the best and brightest for the task at hand. And as they always have, women stepped up, eager to contribute to the fight. The women of the OSS and Donovan can be seen as co-architects of early WPS ideals, well before WPS terminology and framework existed, and certainly well before combat exclusion laws had been lifted. They were helping lay the foundation and paving the way. Their legacy lives on in the trailblazers we will see and hear from firsthand tonight. And moderating tonight's panel is the memorial's president, Phyllis Wilson. Phyllis is a 37-year veteran of the United States Army. She served as an intel officer in Iraq with special operations units, which included Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Green Berets. Phyllis also had a civilian career as a registered nurse during her 16 years in the Army Reserve. She's a graduate of the Defense Language Institute for both German and Spanish, has jumped out of military airplanes, and has 2 master's degrees. You could probably win a bar fight, too.
Oh, I think so.
She has been inducted into both the Army Women's Foundation Hall of Fame and the U.S. Veterans Hall of Fame. But before we send it over to Phyllis to launch into the panel discussion, we'll pause to watch Guerrera's trailer to help set the scene.
Troops in contact, target compound.
Combat, it's killing. That's what it is. And it's done in an environment that is often as difficult as you can possibly imagine. Extremes of climate, it's uncivilized, and women can't do it. The requirements for strength and endurance render them unable to do it. Doesn't work.
I knew the moment I stepped in over there at Bragg, I was like, we are being watched and something bigger is shaking out, I guarantee it.
You're looking at each other. Is she as tough as I am?
It was a bunch of female alphas.
You're doing this for every other woman that's gonna come after you. Any argument that a man's gonna have about why women shouldn't be allowed to be here, don't contribute 1 iota.
I thought, war? What are you doing here?
It was a man's club. Like, that is the lion's den that we just walked into.
For 8 years of a war, we didn't see the other half of a target book.
You bring a white man in a very intimidating US uniform, a lot of women will feel uncomfortable.
We're gonna go into that darkness and just be like, you need this done? Okay, let's go.
This is not what I was expecting at all.
Nobody cares if you're a man or a woman. You are defined by your actions purely.
Having this one woman on target freed up probably 4 guys.
I would have liked to have seen that play out a little bit.
I start to wonder if you're there too long, if whatever gains you made start to erode themselves, and soon you leave in the same place you started. What does winning look like?
War's not stopping. How long has America been around? How many wars we've been in? Conflicts? Only thing changes is the date.
Wow, what do you think? So as Kathleen shared with you, I did have the incredible privilege, and boy, once you end up in the special operations community, you swear to God you're never going back to, for me, conventional Army. Had to salute and put headgear on, had to blouse my pants. What the heck is that about? So the standards seemed to the outsiders as if SOF had lowered their standards by what we were permitted to do and not made to do. But in the early 2000s, until 2010, I served with both JSOC and SOCOM, Special Operations Command. And at that point, we were already talking about, I was in my 40s, and we were talking about cultural support teams, women augmenting and supporting. And as a linguist, I understood the value of having somebody there that knew the language, understood the culture, and certainly, as we knew, the men were unable to have a conversation. They couldn't even look at, really, an Afghan woman. So how do we ever win a war when 50% of their population cannot be spoken to and and helped along the way. Because it's that mind and souls. How do you win the heart and minds of what you think is the enemy, but it turns out they're really your allies all along? So what I want to do now is I'm not going to introduce each of them. I'm going to ask each of you to give us a short overview of who you are and why you have become such great friends and partners of us here at the Memorial. Jessica, we'll start with you.
Hi, everyone. First off, thanks for having us and supporting this event in Guerrera. Every time I come here, I feel like inspired, and I leave, incredibly motivated. So thank you. I had the great opportunity of serving on the Cultural Support Team program. That was my exposure to special operations in 2013, and Jenny was a teammate of mine. I went on as signal officer by trade. I even have a space badge. People are like, what is that thing? But I found my way back into special operations after a conventional Signal Corps command, and again, very privileged to spend an additional decade serving alongside some of my greatest friends. And so again, this has been Guerrera has been a privilege and an honor to share the stories of my teammates.
And she mentioned Jenny was in her group, or CST cohort. Jennifer Moreno, a registered nurse, an officer in the United States Army, and then she heard about cultural support teams. I'm in, she said. This spunky little registered nurse, which seems kind of fit as a fiddle, said, I want to be part of this cultural support team. And sadly, in October of 2013, she was killed on a raid with her fellow servicemen that night. And 2 years prior, in October of 2011, cultural support team member Ashley White also laid down her life. I'm very good friends with Debbie White, Mama White, as she goes by, and we both like lemon drop martinis. So we've gotten to be good friends, and I would have never met her probably if Ashley had lived. So sometimes you have to look at those silver linings of, because Jennifer and Ashley laid down their lives for this nation, it brought to light. Think about it, the combat exclusion law had not been lifted. Women were not permitted to serve in combat in 2011 and 2013. Sounded like combat to me, didn't it? To you in 2013 as a CST woman? So next is incredible. Manaz was the equivalent on the Afghan side. She was the platoon leader for the Female Tactical Platoon, trained by our special operators, worked alongside our men and women in special ops. And while she is small, she might be the strongest one at the table here. Let me tell you. Manaz, tell us a little bit about your experience with the FTPs.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Mahnaz, and I was a former female tactical platoon in Afghanistan, and I joined to the military from 2011 to August 2021. So I just saw Jenny here, and you were talking about her. She was, I worked with Jenny we worked together like about 3 months. And I just remember a story that I'm gonna to share, because every time that I remember her, that story came to my mind. So when I was in CAF, I think it was 2012 or 13, end of 2012, I think it was. So every day, like, I go to the gym and run for 6 miles every day. And every time that I come back, like I left the gym and I wanted to go to my room, I saw like Jenny that came from her office. And every time she told me that, hey, Mahnaz, what did you do in the gym? I said that, okay, I ran for 6 miles. And after, I think 2 or 3 times that I saw her that asking this question, I saw her that she bring a protein shake for me. And she did like this for 3 or 4 times back to back every night. And I told her that, Jenny, why you bring every night for me a protein shake? And she said that, Mahnaz, you're so skinny, you need to eat something or drink protein shake. And I said that you don't need to do that. And she said that I'm here to help you guys. I'm here to help your country, and we are here to have a better world, a safer world. So I just remember and wanted to share this story.
And I have to tell you, when I first met Manaz, and of course, as she said, she served until August of 2021, as you well know, that was when Abbey Gate fell. And we were fortunate with the women of the CSTs and other support agencies helped to safeguard a number of the Female Tactical Platoon women out of Afghanistan in time. Not all, but those, we were able to get some of them out, and that's an incredible testament. And her English has greatly improved. So why do we have a man sitting here at the Military Women's Memorial? Woo-hoo, Mark. Mark, I'm so glad you're here because it's not a setup. Mark, tell us a little bit about your background and why you believe this is so important that you tell the story.
So, career Navy SEAL. For the record, I'm not writing a book or making a movie. As a matter of fact, this is probably my first public engagement of any sort since I retired in 2020 out of JSOC, because Jess asked me to do it, and it was the right thing to do. So the Navy in Naval Special Warfare had spun off our own, we called them female engagement teams. And I was on a 9-month deployment with Shannon Kent, and I was the senior enlisted leader in charge, well, for that 9-month deployment in Afghanistan, where she was the team leader that ran the female engagement team. And watching her perform throughout over 1,300 operations, covering 26,000 kilometers of contested space, I'm a believer. She was value added, and where we were inept, she wasn't. And her benefit to our task force, and not just in intel, in so many other aspects of just security and what you worry about when you're in combat, when you want to save lives and ensure that, you know, the bullets aren't flying in your direction. We have a way that we categorize things: mission enhancing, mission essential, and mission critical. I always put the females in the mission critical category. So I would say that's why I'm here, as the only man on this panel.
So all of you that got a book, the copy of the book, send me. That is Shannon Kent's story. And she died in Syria in 2019, January 2019. She's buried and laid to rest here at Arlington in Section 60. DoD Linguist of the Year, not just the Navy, the entire Department of Defense Linguist of the Year in 2010. Spoke 10 languages and dialects. Just an incredible, incredible woman. And when she died, she left 2 baby boys behind and a Green Beret husband, Joe Kent. Joe is the co-author of the book, and there's photos in there of them as a family. The last photo taken where they're holding these 2 little boys, 1 and 3 at the time. And so it's interesting to watch. I met Joe first in late 2019, only months after he had Shannon buried here at Arlington. And being Army, and I was married to a Green Beret warrant officer just like Joe was, we struck up a conversation right away. And I asked him if he had ever been to the Military Women's Memorial, and he looked at me and said, I was there earlier today. So this is an important place for all of us to be part of. So I'm going to start with Jessica and ask Jessica, so the film Guerrera, really what made you decide that this was worth telling, and what got you started with it?
Yeah, the origin story I usually start out with, my cousin was dating a filmmaker. However, I'll go a little left of that. Again, I had the privilege of serving on the CST program, and Jenny was in my cohort. She was sitting next to me when we found out that we were going to go on the direct action side. So there were 2 tracks for the CST program: village stability operations and direct action. So we celebrated after. Fast forward, we actually share a birthday, so I hit her up on IM message on June 25th, 2013. I'm like, hey, I heard you went out on mission last night. How'd it go? And she's like, I found a weapons cache. And it was through a young child on target that told her where that weapons cache was. So, you know, that's just an example of the value that she provided to that team. And, you know, when she was killed in 2013 alongside the other 3 Americans, I had the privilege of going down to Kandahar, where the main memorial service was held. and there was a quote on her wall. And I told myself I wasn't going to get emotional, so there was a quote on her wall, and it was in a bubble, and it was, "Be strong when you are weak, be brave when you are scared, be humble when you are victorious, and be badass every day." And I was like, all right, that right there, I'm going to live and try and live to that every single day. And how do we share, I guess the full circle, how do we take these stories? Storytelling is so powerful, and we're in such an incredible institution. I finally did my her story, thank you to you. I did register and put it in there, but storytelling is such a powerful tool. And we have the book Ashley's War, we have Send Me of Shannon Kent, and Guerrera was just a way to tell not only Jenny's story, but the stories of my other heroes like Manaz and my other teammates. So I think what we'll do, there's a 17 terabytes of footage, 5 years. We started filming Guerrera in 2022, and it was my cousin's boyfriend, and I had enough money to pay for 15 minutes of a film. So Will Agee and Dulcinea Productions, he's the director, producer, and the founder of Dulcinea Productions, and I am forever grateful to him and the characters, the featured characters that you allowed us to tell their story, because it is very worthy of being told, and I hope inspires the next generation of those who, whether they serve in uniform or serve in other ways. But if we will, let's play the Jenny clip. This is some extra, what I call treasure trove footage. There's a lot still to go through, but we'll play the Jenny clip first, which again is another example of how she provided value to her team.
This gal, no shit, figured out in a span of a few minutes by talking to one of the kids where the actual high value target was, and was able to re-navigate an entire ranger platoon over to the right location, and potentially not messed up someone's household and other family. It's just, she was incredible. She was amazing at everything that she did, and she was so on point and precise. She was no kidding a ranger. She was on point with everything that she did.
And one other thing I'll say about Will, I consider the people in the film some of my best friends. Well, he sat and interviewed these guys and gals for hours on hours, so I would learn more about them from watching the interview footage than sometimes, you don't have all those times, those deep conversations. So it was a real honor for me to be able to go back and learn more about my teammates. And I'll share 3 more treasure trove clips. Let's play Cats.
She'd passed selection, she'd come back, and she was going through the training. And as this young 24-year-old, maybe I was a first lieutenant at this point, I pull her aside. I think she was a master sergeant at that time, and I was like, what are you doing? I think she had already hit 20 years. And I was like, you do know you could retire. What are you doing here? And she just looks at me, and she was, how could I ask any of my female soldiers to do something that I'm not willing to do myself? And that was just okay. That level of strength I had never seen before.
We'll go for Manaz's.
I haven't seen it.
You've not seen this?
No. You go to their house and knock and say that, hey, come out, we are coming here to search you. We can go during the day. For security of country, for security of the people, for security of the world, we had to do that because we couldn't find targets during the day. During the day, targets go, for example, they are out of their house, and so they are not over there that we go and capture them. They are terrorists, they are Taliban, they are ISI, and so we need to capture them, and so we had to go to their house and search them and find the target.
At the beginning of that clip, you see by, with, and through, and if you ever listen to General Fenton or any Special Operations Commander speak, they generally will talk about by, with, and through. We can't be everywhere in the world, and we have to rely on our partners. And the Female Tactical Platoon, the Katejas, the Male Special Forces, they were force multipliers. And Manaz has been on more missions than definitely me, but even I'd say some of our Ranger brethren, because they're doing it day in and day out. There's no 4-month stint, 4-month back. They're living it every single day. And then the last clip we'll play, Chris's.
I was carrying the machine gun all day, and I was like, all right, I want to see if I can do this. It's a very unwieldy, like awkward weapon. It's got these little bipod legs that just pop out all the time. We hop out of the Zodiac boats, sun's going down, and I'm like walking into the swamp. One of the instructors yells out like, hey, if you're struggling right now, just trade off your equipment or switch out your weapon system because you're gonna slow the whole group down, you're gonna cause a break in contact, which is like when the unit gets separated, and that could cause someone to fail. All right, I'm kind of being selfish here. All the doubt I had about myself like just kind of came crashing down of like, I don't know why I thought I could do this. I feel like it's just me saying like, oh, look what I can do, trying to prove to somebody that I could do this. My friend turned around and was like, hey, Grace, you've been carrying that all day. Let me take it, let's switch weapons. So I did, gave him the machine gun, and I took, a rifle. And then like 50 meters later, a different instructor came up to us, and he was like, Ranger, like, where is your machine gun? Like, he was like yelling at me. You have a major minus, which is a negative spot report, and you're only allowed to get 3 of those before you get recycled. And I already had 1. And he's like, if you don't get it back in 2 minutes, you're gonna get another one. Why do you think you can just trade off your weapon? Like, that's your responsibility. Like, you're the machine gunner. You've been carrying it all day. Like, that's your duty. The platoon is expecting you to do that. You can't just shirk your responsibility. It just completely flipped my mindset from me thinking like, oh, it's just me thinking I can do this and trying to prove to somebody else or prove to everybody, versus like, oh, everybody expects me to be able to do this. Like, this is my job. This is my responsibility. It was almost like it was all mental. And suddenly it was like, oh, this is my job. And I felt that same responsibility you feel when you go into basic training or something of like, this is my responsibility to do this. And, putting that expectation on myself all of a sudden, like, just made it so much easier to carry it. And any struggle I had, it was like, too bad, just deal with it. And I was able to carry it just fine through the rest of the swamp.
I guess while we tell this kind of the evolution of the CST program and how that helped inform, definitely wasn't the only thing that resulted in the combat arms being lifted. Guerrera, Chris Grice is a character because we want to make sure we head nod and again, show their respect for the women that are raising their hands to be in combat arms and do that every day. And then also, I always caveat, CSTs weren't the first ones in combat, by no means, and they definitely weren't the only ones serving on special operations teams. It's just a matter of classification. So this is a story that I hope serves as a platform for folks just to recognize that women are doing some pretty badass things in the world, and that it's for an operational imperative and it advances our strategic objectives.
Manaz. So obviously Afghanistan looks very different now with the Taliban. The FTP women that came to the United States, they're now arrayed across the country. Do you stay in touch with them?
Yeah, of course, every single day we had a chat group. So.
How are they doing? How are you doing?
They are good, we are good. Fortunately, when we were in Afghanistan, we have privilege to work with CSTs. And when Afghanistan fell into the Taliban, the CST keep calling us and evacuated us from Afghanistan. And now there are several organizations that help FTP to access to education, English classes, legal help, and so many other things. So.
You talk about some of these organizations. I believe you're leading an organization, aren't you? What are you doing nowadays?
I work with another CST, and so we are leading an organization that is called Next Mission.
Next Mission.
Yeah, we will provide legal things for FTP. So, for example, for trying to do like reunification family for them and applying for them green card or something, green card, travel document, something like that.
Yeah, so initially our FTP women did not fall into the special immigrant visa category. Is that correct?
Yeah, we are not eligible for that because the special immigrant visa.
You're not eligible for, wait a minute. You guys served with our best and brightest, our special operations, knowing that you would lay your life down for your nation and for your brothers and sisters wearing American uniforms. You do not qualify for special immigrant visa. Is that correct?
Yep, yeah, we are not because for a special immigrant visa, we have like two categories. One category is the person who that work with Americans and they get paid from U.S. government. But we work with Americans, but we get paid from our government. That's why we are not eligible for a special immigrant visa. So we will go to the refugee platform.
You're in the refugee category. Mark, let's talk a little bit more about what you see as far as, do you think that sharing some of these stories and then making sure that America realizes the people that have served, and I think most Americans are completely unaware of how this happens. So let's talk a little bit from your perspective as a Navy SEAL, but as an American. What do you think about how this plays out?
So I think for me, I mean, and I might have been counterculture, it always made sense to me. So I, had sisters growing up, older sisters. I had a very strong mother. So to me, it all is about the capability. And, I've had personal experiences on target, after I was on the Karzai protection detail, watching the government get reformed in Afghanistan. The following deployment in Afghanistan, I was on a target. And we didn't know culturally how to interact with the women, but yet we wanted to be respectful. Mm-hmm. And, I was brought up, you don't hit women, you don't, any of that. So early days in the targets, the women and children weren't even dealt with. They were just kind of, brushed along and looking for any other types of threats. And that was a big mistake. I mean, we were missing out. And on the one target, I'm sitting there off on the side of the room where the women and children are, and I've got this resonating tapping going on, this. But it's weird because, I can feel it. So I'm wondering what's going on, and it ended up being this woman was trying to put a knife into my plate, and it was hitting my ballistic plate, and until I looked down and saw the knife going into my plate, I didn't really realize what was going on. It had not occurred to me at that point to even have that threat or to deal with that threat. So I had to deal with that threat. It was very uncomfortable for me to have to deal with it. And not that, I'm going to stand up here and say it's great to shirk our duty off onto women, but I will say that they were just categorically more suited to deal with that. And in the documentary, I totally agree with the Delta Force operator, proclaimed Delta Force operator, that states, a woman on target, especially with language skill, freed up at least 4 assaulters to look and do those other things. So, early on, on the Karzai PSD, in the measure of success in that war, even compared to how it ended and where we are today, I always liked the fact that I was there when a female was brought back to the cabinet of the president in Afghanistan's government in the health department. Mm-hmm. There's a measure of success to me. Yeah. Girls, and over 50% because of the war there, women had a larger percentile of the population, were being educated and going to school. So, I offer this to a lot of the guys as something to think about as the measure of success. So I don't know. I'm kind of tuned to the benefit of that, and then later on in the 2012 when I was able to have Shannon as a team leader, and we doubled down in the Navy. I mean, we didn't want to make it even ambiguous. We called them female engagement teams. And when the female was the first name in it, they were FET teams, not combat support teams. We called them female engagement teams because we knew in the past with Congress and with certain things in birthright and all of these things that are more of the legacy issues that had come up that are more validated within precedents that has been set. We were like, we're going to make it clear that these are female engagement teams going out on combat missions to engage with females. And we sold it with vignettes and the benefits. So, there's no original idea here. Back to OSS, which you brought up, I believe this has been going on and we have not paid attention to it since the 40s. And, lest we want to repeat mistakes of old, women should always be engaged with us holistically as we look at any problem set. We're going to come up with a better solution when we do that. And they did not pay me to say that. I'm not being paid for any of this, just a disclaimer.
If I could pop in. So
Sure.
I did CST 2013. I didn't know what women, peace, and security was, and it really didn't pass in U.S. legislation until 2017.
Right.
Dr. Lisa Bevan Brooks, I was at CGSC sitting at Fort Leavenworth, and I took a woman in war class, and she came in and said, "This is WPS." And I said, "I did that. I didn't know what it was called. That's cool."
That's awesome, yeah. And I love this because, you think about the little nuances, but like when I was in Iraq in 2004, 2006, 8, 9, 10, without the engagement teams of some type of women on target, all of the guys in Iraq, the bad guys, would hand all of their cell phones over to their women who dropped it in their bras or the front of, and guys knew you can't frisk a woman down. So we never had the intel that we needed to come off the target to figure out who the next hit is the next night. But when you put women on target and they're patting down another woman, 5 cell phones on one woman. I bet you they're not all hers. And we learned along the way too, because initially we'd break the phone down and no, after a while we figured out, leave it plugged in, see who all's going to be contacting this phone number here and figure out where they are and triangulate at least for 48 hours and figure out, have they figured out this guy's been rolled up yet? But it was really incredible. The things that we left on the table for a number of years simply because we were unwilling. One, we wanted to be culturally attuned to what was going on. But then secondarily, once you put the women on target, what a difference it made. So let's talk back to Guerrera here. Jessica, what do you really hope that people, and they watch this entire film, what do you want them to take away from it?
There's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack. But if I were to distill it down, I hope that it unites, that it reminds us that more unites us than divides us. I hope that it informs. I don't envy Will, who took 20 years of the global war on terror and distilled it into 3 episodes. We were filming in Kandahar when Kandahar fell to the Taliban. That was not episode 3. The episode 3 we would never have imagined turned out how episode 3 was. And then to inspire, and that goes back to the origin story and sharing these great men and women and the values that they've embodied with audiences like yourself. And by uniting, informing, and inspiring, we honor the legacy of our fallen.
Yeah. I'd like to add, the beauty of this is the active duty organizations that have embraced this, even though we are not in active conflict, have not reduced the amount of women in the ranks. And I think that is a testimony to the cultural shift, especially mostly within special operations, that that is enduring. And God help us if we end up in another conflict, but there is no doubt in my mind that these same type of women will be there, and they will be shoulder to shoulder with our special operators going into these new problem sets and figuring it out.
We just went to a BOLIC class. We spoke AllTru.
Explain what BOLIC is.
Oh, Basic Officer Leaders Course. I apologize, acronyms. So it's 150 second lieutenants, and AllTru, which is the nonprofit we stood up alongside when we started filming Guerrera. We brought some of the characters and some of the role models to this group of second lieutenants, and John Ryan, who's also in the crowd here, who conducted rescue and recovery operations after Ground Zero reminded me that it was the 32nd anniversary of the 93 World Trade Center bombing on the day that we were doing the role model engagement with the second lieutenants. And we paused, and at 12:18 on the dot, and I asked the students, the lieutenants, when were you born? And they're like, 2000, 2001. And I was like, oh my gosh, I feel old. And you may remember 9/11, but you probably don't even know about the 93 bombing. And what you've done, you've raised your right hand to serve, and thank you for that, because we can't rest on our laurels and we have to stay vigilant.
We're going to close down the panel conversation here momentarily, but I want to tell you a little bit about the first time when I met Manaz. General Scotty Miller, who was the last four-star commander in ISAF, and he and we served at JSOC in the early 2000s, and then at SOCOM when he was leading the JIATF there, the Joint Interagency Task Force. And so I've stayed connected with him, and when he came here to open that first Women, Peace, and Security program and talk about our CST and FTP women, I can't tell you how many male Afghan men, how many men were in the room that had served alongside him and just revered him. I served with Stan McChrystal, and likewise, those are the kind of leaders that I'm telling you, they could go to the gates of hell and turn and go, come on, Phyllis, and I would trust them enough to walk through. There's very few people in this world that have that degree of leadership, and you just know you're doing the right thing because of them. When Manaz was there that day, in late 2022, year after the fall of Abbey Gate. And we walked her through this memorial, and I encourage you, after this event here is over, there's food and refreshments, wander through and see, there's parts where there's the FTP and CST display, but we got to our yellow ribbons, where every woman that has died in a combat zone since 9/11, and Manaz, it took her no time, and I knew she saw Jennifer Moreno instantly because her face changed and the tears came, and she had to reach up and touch her picture with the yellow ribbon. And we took it down so you could hold it in your hand, and we took a picture of you together. What does it mean, this sisterhood, whether we're from different countries or not? I think there's a sense that maybe a lot of the men don't fully grasp, because we're always trying to prove we're just as good as you. Some of them are far better. This skinny little runt Afghan woman here refused to ever be last on a team, going up mountains and down mountains. She was leading the FTP. She was the platoon leader. She was never going to be the last one on those teams. And for somebody this small, that Jenny had to give her protein shakes because you're too skinny, what's it like to know that this sisterhood is really universal? It isn't just Afghan women or US women, it's all of us standing shoulder to shoulder. What does that mean to you?
Like, if I'm gonna to come back, like talk like just in our relationship with like CSTs, like the bond that we create in Afghanistan, like even like between FTPs and CSTs or like other groups, it doesn't matter, especially when you are talking in the group. Sometimes it's really hard to make a strong bond with people. You need to have like something. So we just started as a colleague. We were just a colleague, and we work together. We go to the mission together, and we protect each other in the mission, and we teach each other like the things about mission. And so like we had a lot of differences, like cultural differences, religion differences, and I think the biggest problem was language barrier. But the thing was that we didn't let these differences make a whole between us. We use this as an opportunity to learn from each other. So FTPs learn English, but CSCs didn't. I think the reason was that because CSCs came to Afghanistan just for 6 months, and FTP, like I was in KK for 10, FTPs for 10 years, so that's why I learned a little bit English. And we didn't let these differences to make a whole between us. And when evacuation happened, like that make the relationship between us more stronger, because we just left in Afghanistan and the Taliban came here and we were in very severe dangerous. And the CSCs keep calling us. We didn't have internet because we were near the airport and the internet doesn't work, and I don't know how thousands of dollars they spend on the phone to just call us directly to see how we are near the airport. So when we came here, still we are working together. We are, Jessica, through the AllTru organization, we help Afghans in Afghanistan, the girls to have access to the education. AllTru like provide internet and education to the girls of Afghanistan, and so we are helping them. And also we working with some other CSCs to provide some English classes, legal services here to for FDP here in United States.
She's not going to ever quit, is she? No. You've seen too much.
Thank you.
And it's an honor to have you here. So I'm going to hand it back to Kathleen. I don't know, do we want to open it up for any questions, or are we moving to a...
Well, we want to keep on schedule,
Yes.
and we do want to encourage, again, that's what the reception is for. So we want to encourage you, we're hitting high tops, and then we can carry on the conversation after the program ends. So for right now, we definitely want to give you a round of applause. That was magnificent. And if you guys want to go out. Okay, well, we're doing a few switch of the microphones. I'm going to tee up the second portion of our program, a fireside chat exploring current trends in counterterrorism and the importance of interagency collaboration, all at the intersection of WPS. And our partner for this session is the Atlantic Council Counterterrorism Project, which is somewhat new at the Atlantic Council. It's an outgrowth of a study project that they had already established. And because of that, I thought it might be worthwhile to give a little bit of background and sort of the connective tissue here tonight. So in the May of 2024, the Atlantic Council announced the launch of the Counterterrorism Project, or the CTP for short. Citing an increase in number of global counterterrorism-related challenges, the project is designed to take a deep dive into the future of global terrorism threats and counterterrorism efforts. There are 5 thematic areas they focus on: current and emerging threats, state sponsors of terrorism, terrorist use of hostage-taking, and terrorist financing and supply chains, and emerging technology tactics, techniques, and procedures. But there is also a notable 6th area of focus for the CTP: women in counterterrorism. This 6th area serves as a cross-cutting endeavor that informs and contributes to the other 5 fields. So basically, WPS cuts across and is the foundation for all of their focus areas. And I thought that was really fantastic. Moderating the fireside will be Timothy Tito Torres. Tito is a global strategist, national security expert, and 4th-generation Nevadan. With over 2 decades of military service, intelligence operations, and technology consulting, he advises leaders on AI governance, strategic competition, and digital security. A 2025 Next-Gen Global Leader with US GLC and the Atlantic Council Counterterrorism Project, he is also a founding partner of SOFT, one of our partners tonight, and providing executive training and talent placement from intelligence and special operations. Tito served 20 years in the US Special Army Operations, including 11 combat deployments. His career spanned high-risk missions, intelligence operations, and diplomatic engagements. In 2025, so just in a few months, he will embark on a global expedition studying technology, security, and innovation ecosystems. A presidential leader and Tillman Scholar, he also leads Moral Compass Federation, advocating for veterans and national security policy. He also holds a master's in international business policy from Georgetown University. And I did not say that slowly enough because they're still getting mic'd. So Let me just reiterate while they're still getting ready back there that to Phyllis's point during the reception, please do enjoy each other's company, grab food and something to drink, but take the time to walk the gallery. The reception is set up in the upper gallery, but you can walk the full length. We have exhibitions on both sides of the gallery. And special for tonight, there is what I like to call a pop-up exhibit, right? But it really focuses in on the CSTs, the FTPs, and other women in SOF. So you'll find that of interest. We also have at the furthest end of the gallery, it's our newest exhibit called A Sea Change. And it looks at the past 30 years of women on combatant ships. And that is a magnificent, magnificent exhibit as well. Well, it looks like we're almost ready. Tito, I've already done your introduction. What I didn't include in that introduction when we were talking about your 11 combat deployments was that Tito served with Alex Horton. And if you want to talk just a little, I think that's, again, a nice part of connective tissue, that he, within those combat deployments, served with the CSTs as well. Alex is featured in the documentary, too. With that, I will hand it over to you guys. We've got about 30 minutes. We might be just a few minutes behind, but over to you, Tito.
Okay, I'll keep it tight on 30 minutes for you. No, what a great first panel. Thank you for having us here. So what we're going to try to do is adjust direction a little bit and take some of that conversation as we're looking at the history and where we are, and look at the future of counterterrorism, starting to look at where do we go ahead from here. We're going to use the executive order on the cartels to unpack some of that, because that's a new environment that we're going to be working in, examine some past lessons of what we hold on and what we take forward, and highlight the role of women in CT and law enforcement in this new environment that we're working in. First, I want to take a chance to introduce my two panelists. First, I'm going to start with Supervisory Special Agent Bernadette Alway, led the FBI New York office's Crisis Management and Special Events Program, overseeing security for high-profile events such as the U.S. Open and the UN General Assembly. She now leads public-private partnerships in New York, where she had previously done that role in Los Angeles, and plays a key role in national security training at the FBI Academy, with a career spanning counterterrorism, fraud investigations, and crisis response. She also serves on the FBI's Victim Service Response Team for national mass casualty incidents. Before joining the FBI, she was a police officer specializing in computer forensics and sexual assault investigations. I want to introduce Doug Livermore. Doug is the Senior Vice President of Solution Engineering at the Cencor Group, leading business development for the intelligence community and special operation forces. Previously served as the Director of Sensitive Activities and Irregular Warfare for the Department of the Navy, as an advisor on special operations and intelligence policy at the Pentagon. A former Green Beret, Doug completed multiple combat deployments, including Iraq and Afghanistan, and currently serves as Deputy Commander for Special Operations Detachment X. He is also deeply involved in veteran advocacy, serving as the Vice President of the Special Operations Association of America and supporting evacuation efforts for foreign interpreters. He is also a member of the Counterterrorism Project for the Atlantic Council. So first, I'm going to put a little bit of framework on some of the executive order and some of the changes that happened January 20th. So the January 20th EO designating cartels as foreign terrorist organizations represents a shift in how the U.S. approaches cartel violence, not just organized crime, but as a direct national security threat. This also changes how interagency coordination, military law enforcement partnerships, and global cooperation are more critical than ever. So I want to start with Doug. You've written extensively about the balance between military force and law enforcement when countering threats. Now that cartels are designated as FTOs, does this shift the balance towards military intervention?
Yeah, so obviously we've seen a bit of a sea change with the shift from the Biden administration to the Trump administration, and certainly a major component of the presidential election was this discussion around the fentanyl smuggling across our southern border. I think historically the way the United States has viewed the threat posed by the cartels to the United States has been through the law enforcement lens. There has historically been very close collaboration between American law enforcement and Mexican law enforcement. Obviously, there have been a number of challenges there. We saw largely a cessation of that cooperation as the American law enforcement ran into many of the challenges associated with the corruption that was endemic to Mexican law enforcement with their counterparts. That said, I think that what we're seeing right now with this designation and a lot of the initial steps being taken by the Trump administration is a marked shift from the law enforcement approach to a more militant use of the military, use of paramilitary capabilities to apply pressure to the cartels. That said, I think that there's certainly a lot of value in there, particularly as we look at where within the Mexican government there are those forces that, despite the widespread corruption, are more effective, efficient, and trustworthy partners to go after the cartels. We've seen the Mexican Senate overwhelmingly voted in support of allowing U.S. Special Operations Forces. As an SF guy, I do have to brag a little bit, 7 Special Forces Group, to come in and partner with the Mexican Naval Marines, which again has been a highly effective force in previous counter-cartel operations, to increase the pressure against the designated cartels inside Mexico. Similarly, I think that we're seeing some of the conversations between the Mexican government and the American government really focus on how do we amplify where we've seen success in the past with the Mexican Naval Marines, some of the Special Operations Forces, that have largely been separate and distinct from that plata o plomo, silver or lead campaign waged by the cartels to really compromise the Mexican government. All to say, I do think that even as we ramp up the military cooperation, and I cannot be more clear in my argument that the military aspects of this counter-cartel campaign has to be done in collaboration with and in coordination with and leveraging the other elements of national power, which I know we're going to talk about later, to pursue a holistic campaign against the Mexican cartels. I'll pause there.
No, I mean, that was great framing. One of the key takeaways I want everybody to put in the back of their head as we have this conversation, that while we're reflecting and we have to respect where we're at when it comes to counterterrorism from the experience of the last 20 years, some of that will go with us forward, but it's a different environment. It doesn't automatically qualify you to be leading in that future. And one of the large differences is the interagency coordination and the law enforcement part. Counterterrorism is not just about one agency or defense. It's about how everybody works together, both bilateral but within our U.S. government. So, Bernadette, I want to ask you, from the FBI's perspective, how does the executive order impact cartel-related investigations?
Thank you for that question. First of all, I want to thank everyone for the opportunity here today. The documentary was amazing. I've learned so much. I heard the words force multiplier. That's been a theme throughout my career, starting back when I was in local law enforcement. Presently, I manage private sector engagement, which I think we'll get to that at the end. So I just want to state quickly that I have worked at the OCDETF Fusion Center. I've worked drug trafficking organizations. I've worked fraud. I've worked internationally in our legal attaché in Kazakhstan, but I do not currently work those violations. And I have counterterrorism experience as well. But what I'm seeing, and it's early on, I think we should note that this order was only signed just a few weeks ago, and we are in government. So I think it'll be interesting to see where we end up, but I do want to focus on the partnerships that we already have in place, and I think we will leverage those. That will be the positive that we take forward. We've had the FBI's role in these violations. First of all, we have worked transnational organized crime. This is not something new to us. Human intelligence, partnership with military, both civilian and active duty reservists. The FBI, we exist because of partnerships. We would not have any success without this. We're relatively small. We're one of the larger federal agencies. Obviously, we're larger than DEA and ATF, but still we're relatively large in comparison. I'm in the New York City area right now. I work at the New York FBI office. You know, the New York Police Department is larger than the FBI globally. So we have to keep that in mindset when we're talking about scope and scale. As a drug trafficking, moving forward into an FTO, that is going to change some things for us, right? That is going to move us into a national security investigation from a criminal enterprise investigation. With that, we will be afforded advanced techniques that we can talk about a little bit more, but just focusing on the Patriot Act, and I'm sure many of you in the room, just material support to terrorism. The small element, the activity alone that is needed to open up what impact we can have, combining that with partnership, with tactical, operational, intelligence that we get already through the DIA. Our legal attaché is in country. We do have some partnerships. We know there's obviously compromise that can be held with any partner externally, but we do the best that we can to vet that. We have processes in place to vet those sources and pieces of information.
I want to ask a question to both of you on challenges and opportunities with this, with the partnerships and with this broadness that this is going to cover, DEA, DHS, to tie together to some of the themes tonight. Joe Kent was appointed as the Counterterrorism Center Director. And to some of your stories, some of this isn't new. I had the Bureau on target with me in the mid-2000s, and they had authorities and permissions that they could do that we couldn't do. But there are some areas that we're stepping into that I think is new, and there are new environments. So in any time there's a drastic shift in policy, there's opportunities. And Doug, I'll start with you. Where do you see the greatest opportunities and constraints?
Well, I'll start with constraints. As I alluded to in my initial comments, I think that one of the challenges that we're looking at, particularly in our collaboration with the Mexican government and some of the other countries where the cartels that have been designated operate, is that there is a long history of endemic corruption, compromise, and infiltration of those governments by the cartels. Going all the way back to the model that we saw with the Colombian cartels, I was speaking earlier today about Pablo Escobar, who coined the term, as I mentioned in my initial comments, plato o plomo, silver or lead. I mean, it's an incredibly compelling argument by which a cartel can infiltrate their way into the government institutions when your opportunities are either unlimited wealth or death to you and your family. So I certainly am empathetic to that challenge. But we've seen that in particular when we look at these Mexican cartels, the Sinaloa, the Jalisco, the other designated cartels, that they've been highly effective in infiltrating into, in particular, the Mexican institutions. To the extent that I think that from a counterintelligence perspective, as we look at how we are able to collaborate and cooperate with them, there will be challenges there that will be twofold. Both challenges and opportunities. One being that we, from the American perspective, or the United States, will have to apply our robust capabilities, the counterintelligence capabilities, to identify where those challenges are and try to root those out and assist the Mexicans in identifying those bad actors. Something that the new Mexican government has shown themselves and has demonstrated a willingness to pursue in cooperation with us. But I also think the opportunities are there is how do we help the Mexicans remake their institutions in a way that really purge that. What we've seen in those institutions in the Mexican government, I mentioned the Naval Marines and a few other organizations, they've been incredibly effective and have managed to resist that level of infiltration by the cartels. So that is the challenge and the opportunity there. Again, and I think building off of what Bernadette had said and what we had been talking about before we came in here, is there will certainly be instances where the United States and our forces of either law enforcement, military, or paramilitary will be best positioned to pursue activities against the cartels based upon an inability in some cases, I'll say, of the Mexican government to prosecute those targets. In those instances, I think to the greatest extent possible, if we collaborate with the Mexican government, we can still pursue those targets and be supportive of really this rebirth of the Mexican institutions in a way that allow them to push back against where we've seen, in many cases, cartels asserting almost like quasi-state territorial control.
Bernadette, from your side, where do you see opportunities and constraints?
Well, I see a tremendous amount of opportunities. Some of them I can't see the path through because I think we're going to get a surge of resources. I'm sure you've seen this in media, so I'm not over-disclosing here. But our headquarters component here in the Washington capital area are going to be pushed out to the field. Those resources are going to be allocated, no secret sauce here, right? They're going to be allocated initially to this surge that we want to make on the cartel. This is a priority for the administration, for our director, and for the FBI. And I want to foot stomp. We do have partnerships in place already, especially on the information gathering, the information sharing. Now you're going to combine that with technical and operational experience that we have not had in the past. And we're looking forward to making those prosecutions, right? That is what the FBI does. That's what we're different than on any other organization, I think, that's both a national security and investigative agency, is that we're going to work towards those prosecutions and incarcerations, but we do have to have faith and do that, right, put that stock in the partnership in country. We do have a strong legal attaché program there. We also have, in talking about partnership, I want to speak to the National Academy, NEI, which is the National Executive Institute, leads. These are alliances that we already have that are vetted, with vetted law enforcement personnel from in-country that want to make a difference. So that is who we will coordinate with to hopefully yield some success. And you mentioned specifically like other agencies, DHS, ATF, Secret Service, whatever those agencies are. I think that we're going to have more conversations about roles, authority, mission. Deconfliction is always really important to us. There's the OSADF Fusion Center, there's special operations that DEA has where we do deconflict, especially if we're talking about human source recruitment, which is what the FBI does very well. We want to make sure that that those individuals aren't looked at in cooperation by other agencies, and we end up having a blue on blue. So, and again, I love the military aspect of bringing as a partner into this so that we can make less mistakes. And that's what I'm excited about.
Let's talk a little bit about your story in particular. The word diversity. In our prep call, we talked about diversity of thought, diversity of leadership, all the different skills and the panels before properly laid out the value that is brought in that diversity of thought and different experiences. As someone who's worked at the highest levels within the Bureau and who's had a very impressive career, tell me some of the styles or some of the lessons learned or some of the takeaways that you'd be willing to share with us.
Well, I have to be honest, right? We are under a strict prohibition in talking about the diversity and inclusion efforts right now. In fact, I supervised that program. That was a D at the end of it. So that's no longer a program. So I'm only going to speak, I want to say, none of my opinions are based on opinions of the FBI or carried out by my executive management or my agency. My own. I'm only going to talk about my own personal path. That way it's individual to me. I came up through law enforcement as a local campus police, right? Jokingly, I always say I was like one step above like mall guard. Maybe, depending on the conversation. Or how many beverages were had. And I was recruited. So recruitment, I want to talk about that. I think that's a sister thought to diversity, is recruitment and being strategic in who we recruit. I think we have to be, because that's still an initiative that I have, so I have to carve out what will that look like. And finding the most talented individuals. I heard earlier, like always trying to prove that we can do it. But there is a actualization that we are in fact better. I often correct women who say that, women that I supervise or superiors to me that have been trained a certain way to apologize if they say something that sounds confident even, and capable. So I started there. That's why I started with I was recruited by the FBI, and I thought, why would the FBI want someone from, I worked at Penn State University as a police officer. And he touched all those things that you heard in my bio. I was involved in sexual assault investigations. I was involved in policy. I raised my hand for computer forensics. These are, maybe not the sexual assault coordinator, but definitely the computer forensics was not a non-traditional female skill. And I wasn't afraid of that. I didn't back down to that. So when it was pointed back to me, as I do now, I take that mindset and I use the mirror and the reflection and say, no, you do have the skill set. And I build people up. All people that are qualified from, it doesn't matter what we look like. I don't want to talk about diversity of how we look, but even of thought and area, geographical area, political and economic variances. We all bring something different to the table. I've found that I've been most successful when I'm surrounded of people who are not like me. So you look through a different lens at a problem. Me coming from the offices that I've been in, Jackson, Mississippi, Los Angeles, Chicago, and now New York. There are 55 field offices. I've been in 4 of them, plus 5 different divisions at FBI headquarters. But I can tell you that things are very different in each one of those offices, not because of the employees. We always hire very talented employees, regardless of what they look like, but the culture that we're embedded in, and going back to the CSTs, not being afraid to learn that culture and leverage it and take away the advantages of knowing. My recruit or FTO told me, you can't play in the backyard until you know your backyard, right? You can't do your job until you know your environment. So the CST is so important. And fast forwarding now, because I want to keep us on time, I continue to be on VSRT, Victim Services Rapid Deployment Team. I think that's a multidisciplinary team. It is made up of every kind of individual that you can imagine, even by position, by agent, by professional staff, by analyst. The thought of it is we can be better by diversity. So I'm happy to speak to that. And when we go out, we're working directly with the victims. We're not focusing on the subject or the investigation or the leads. We're working with the victims, the deceased. We're giving death notifications. We're trying to extract information from next of kin or returning property that is maybe blood-ridden or from a child at a school. It's a very traumatic role, and people raise their hands to be on this team. And that's the kind of, I think we could draw that analogy for people that come in to the jobs that you do. It takes a certain kind of person to do that, and we're going to continue to do that, and we're going to follow whatever executive orders come out. We're going to be the best version that we could be.
National security, yeah.
So
Please, Doug.
very, very quickly on that, I don't want to go off our time. Here we go. We're diverting from the plan. But real quickly, I did want to follow up, on Bernadette's great comments, but also in our opening, we talked a little bit about the Office's Strategic Services. So I'm a member of the OSS Society, huge proponent who's written more than anybody else should read about the Office of Strategic Services. But sort of building off of that, is what was Wild Bill Donovan's focus on diversity of thought, not on, again, what do you look like, what's your gender, et cetera, but really opening up the aperture in a way that allowed to pick from amongst the best and brightest, regardless of gender. And I had the privilege several years ago now, not to date myself, when I was working at the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations of Low Intensity Conflict. Mr. Chris Miller, a good dear friend of mine, was the acting ASD. And we got to go down to Fort Bragg for the graduation of the first woman to graduate the Special Forces Qualification Course. It was an exceptional event, one of the great experiences of my life. But what was important in that moment was the Special Forces community, of which I am, again, privileged to be a part of, changed nothing about the standards, but we just executed what was the directive from the President of the United States at the time to open up all of the combat arms to women. So it was an honor to celebrate that, but then also see that since then, my Special Forces community has embraced women and continued to bring them into the community in a way that I think has been generative, in that, like, it's not, hey, you're a woman Special Forces operator, but like, you're just a Special Forces operator. So all to say, I think that if we continue by opening up the aperture and making those opportunities available to all while not doing anything different about the standards, we are definitely bringing in an entire cross-section of the American people in a way that allows us to amplify the impacts that we're having on the battlefield and really position ourselves in a way that will be more effective going forward. Sorry, Tito, I know that was unscripted.
No, I mean, that was great, and I'll use some of my own personal story there. I was lucky enough to do 5 deployments with 6 different CSTs. And I was a young squad leader. I was enlisted for most of my career before I switched over to warrant officer. And there was definitely some growing up that I had to do as a 22-year-old E6. But when I started going on target and seeing the value and that maturation, I did the BIT TQ for all 6 of those deployments, the interrogation on target, or battlefield interrogation, tactical questioning. And that became my ranger buddy. Every single deployment, that was kind of my role, to take them on and go with them, and I was lucky enough to advise on a few selections. and watch the selection process. And so I love the quote, and Wild Bill Donovan is a hero of mine, don't leave talent on the table, right? Bring everybody to the table. And with that theme of where that value's been brought, I think, in the community, and to some of the comments in the first panel, the mind shift change hasn't changed. Where women need to be in the counterterrorism fight or the interagency fight or the law enforcement fight needs to continue. So where can we take some of the lessons learned from 20 years of fighting global war on terrorism to this environment that's shifting? And that can go a couple different ways, but the future counterterrorism fight isn't necessarily going to be 25 Rangers, I'm going to say Rangers instead of Green Berets, hitting the target with CSTs and developing that. We don't own the airspace necessarily. You have drones coming on you. You have counterterrorism. You have Twitter firing up the moment you're on target. Everybody knows it's a different fight, to include not only the women that are going with you on target, but understanding the women that are in the environment that you're operating in is another part of WPS, and understanding what you're fighting and what you're dealing with in that space. So I'd love to take, what are some of the lessons learned that we can take forward with us that we did well? What are some opportunities that maybe when it comes to the women in the counterterrorism space that we can use, and especially using some of your background and some of your experience personally?
Well, first of all, I did work counterterrorism, and there were not a lot of, if I'm being frank, there were not a lot of women working counterterrorism. I also worked weapons of mass destruction. I worked counter-nuclear smuggling with the White House National Security Council. I was always singular in those environments. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of, there's not a lot of women that are in the counterterrorism realm. As an agent, I shouldn't say that. We have multiple positions that contribute to counterterrorism investigations. I mentioned, linguist was mentioned before, critical, intel analysts, forensics accountants. So it's finding the talent, as you mentioned before, not leaving the talent anywhere on the table, bringing it all in. So we can still take those lessons learned and find whether it's the CST model or what is that skill set, what is defined. So it needs to be done through data analysis and looking at it strategically. What is the gap that we need to fill, and how do we fill that with the best suited individual? And there are some skills that certain people are better at than others. I don't want to get into any gender bias or anything of that nature today. Where I see this going, it is going to be a different type of strategic warfare. We're talking now technology. We're talking cyber. We're talking drones. We're talking generative AI and cryptocurrencies. So I want to just plug that, because that's where I'm at right now, in that space of private sector partnership. And I think that is the other piece that is very important to where we're heading. And we have everything in the InfraGard. There's 16 critical infrastructures that I supervise and manage those programs. And those sectors are very important, all of them. But we have hospitals, we have government facilities, we have our water and dams and nuclear power. So if an adversary wants to come after us, it's going to be to bring down our infrastructure. And then we also have Fortune 500 companies that we're working with, just because of the wealth alone that they have. You have to have over $1 billion more in revenue to partner with the FBI. So we do threat sharing, information sharing. We're not the only agency doing that. The CIA is doing that right now. They've started a new program. It's with specific sectors on technology that is critical to the U.S. government. So they're coming to us because we've been doing private sector engagement for a while. We're pretty good at it. So I think that's going to be on the next forefront. In particular, as tying it back to these FTOs, is looking at the money, right? And now it's going to be in crypto, and we're going to have those partnerships with chain analysis, and Bitcoin and Coinbase, and all those. So I think there's a lot of work that together, and I know that the military definitely the military operations internationally has things that they can accomplish with a lot, because a lot of these companies, of course, are operating outside of the U.S. and may not be follow through with legal process that we have here in the United States. So there's definitely going to be a gap there that we're going to need to fill with partnership.
And if I may, real briefly, we were talking a little bit before the session this evening, and one of the experiences that I have that I think is applicable, particularly as we look at how we target the cartels and address that threat to U.S. national security, really was the model that I had the privilege of experiencing under the previous Trump administration. At the time, I was at the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, when at the start of the last Trump administration, the Islamic State in Iraq and al-Sham, or ISIS, or what was the major threat. And for those of us that are old enough in the room to recall that, the Trump administration initiated the Defeat ISIS strategy, which I got to be the intelligence representative to that from OSD, and we worked through this holistic strategy to how we were going to defeat ISIS. But the military component of it was such a small part. We had Treasury, we had Department of Justice, we had FBI, we had Department of State, we had USAID, we had all of the dogs and cats of the United States government that were participating, not just in the execution, but the actual planning of the strategy that we ultimately ended up successfully executing to defeat ISIS. But incumbent in all of that was the fact that it was not a bunch of 6-foot-tall men like myself from the special operations community that were actually putting the boots to ISIS and defeating them. It was the Treasury analyst, it was the Department of Justice special agent at the FBI, and it was completely irrespective of what their gender was. So I would argue, and I have somewhat, anyway, but I've argued that, at the end of the day, while when we look at how we target the cartels, absolutely, I think that there is a time and place for the military aspect, there's a time and place for the paramilitary aspect, but when we start looking at how do you ultimately defeat $1 trillion industry that is rooted directly across our border, which, unlike the global war on terror or the Defeat ISIS campaign, we are looking at an adversary on the other side of the world. There are going to be a number of challenges that I think are better addressed through the interagency process, through a whole of government approach that leverages all the elements of national power, our diplomatic, our information, our military, our economic strengths in a way to really get after the underlying causes. We could talk about, we have all spent a lot of time talking about the supply side, the fentanyl, but also the demand side right here in the United States, which drives the industry at, like I said, $1 trillion a year. But that's going to require leaving absolutely zero talent on the table. So when we start talking about where do we look for that talent, I am gender agnostic, and I think most of us are, in the sense that we should offer those opportunities for everyone that's willing to raise their right hand and swear to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States and participate in this process of undertaking the very serious and important missions that the country asks of us.
Yeah, and unfortunately we're running short on time, and we'll be able to discuss it a little bit more in depth after, but I want to leave with a few thoughts. I'm also a member of the Counterterrorism Project at the Atlantic Council, and there are a lot of people who have a lot of experience from the last 20 years who are trying to figure out the future of how we fight in these different environments, what type of people we bring in the fight, and how do we understand it. And I think it's a testament to tie both panels together on what Kathleen Pearl and Phyllis and the team here are doing, of having Bernadette here, that we have to think about the future differently. The counterterrorism fight and national security is not just our military, it's our law enforcement officers, like you said, anyone who raises their right hand willing to defend the Constitution. And I want to thank Kathleen for the opportunity to be here. I want to thank the panelists, and I also want to thank AllTru, Manaz, and the CSTs that I had lucky enough to have a lot of experience and call a lot of them friends. Thank you.
Well, that has given us a lot to think about and a lot that we can have conversations about. So thank you all again for coming. Please join us in the upper gallery and the full gallery for continued conversation. And I also want to put out a special thank you for the State Directors of Veterans Affairs that have joined us today. Thank you so much, and I hope to catch up with you at the reception as well.